son Medea, io son Medea e li lascio in vita. Che mai fu? Dove son? Dove son? Son ciechi gli occhi miei e i figli di Gesù pote aver pietà. Son figli miei.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Pierluigi Ledda, the Managing Director of the Archivio Storico Ricordi in Milan, and today we are presenting a conversation about Medea on the occasion of the reissue of the record Medea. This record is very important in the history of Casa Ricordi, not only for the involvement of Maria Callas in the role of Medea, not only for the involvement of sound technicians and engineers of Mercury Records from the United States, but also because this was the first record produced by the label Dischi Ricordi in 1958. The label was driven by Nanni Ricordi, the grandson of Giulio Ricordi, and Nanni was a very charismatic figure. He originated the phenomenon of Italian pop singers, the so-called cantautori, like Ornella Vanoni, Luigi Tenco, the first Lucio Battisti. But the label parallelly also released records from avant-garde composers like Silvano Bussotti, Luigi Nono, Goffredo Petrassi, Azio Corghi, Aldo Clementi. So the activity of the label tells very well about this fil rouge in the history of Casa Ricordi, which was the balance between pop and avant-garde, but also the balance between artistic and entrepreneurial instances. And from the perspective of the Archivio Storico Ricordi, the release of Medea marks the collaboration with Bertelsmann and Sonopress, and also marks the start of a process of indexing the records produced by Dischi Ricordi, which will be then shared through our digital resources online for the free consultation. Today, on the occasion of this conversation, we will start with a video message from Camillo Ricordi, the son of Nanni Ricordi, which I really thank and appreciate for his participation. And Camillo also wrote an introductory note in the new booklet of the record. And then the conversation will collect the contribution of three special experts with very different backgrounds. And I take the occasion to thank them, Gabriele Dotto, Dominik Bartmanski, and Andrea Penna. So I hope you will enjoy this conversation, and I also hope that you will enjoy the listening and the rediscover of the Medea record. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Camillo Ricordi, and gives me a special pleasure to welcome you to this special limited edition of Medea of Cherubini, which represent a very important step not only in the history of Ricordi and Ricordi Records, but also for me personally and my father, Nanni Ricordi, who produced with Maria Callas this wonderful collection piece. And because we just moved back from New York in 1957, where I was born and where my father had been was working with Mercury Records to bring the vinyl records long playing to Italy. And we moved, I was born April 1st, 1957. We moved in July, and in September of 1957, there was this magnificent production at La Scala Theater that my father produced. And there was also the first record of Maria Callas, the first interpretation in a record. And it signed also, importantly, the beginning of Dischi Ricordi, of Ricordi Record Division of Casa Ricordi, which eventually will become, in subsequent year, the launching of all the cantautori, of all the pop music variants of Ricordi Records. But it started all with Medea, performed by Maria Callas, and also Renata Scotto, who was an emerging soprano there, and that importantly, Renata has been a very close friend of the family and was present also here in Miami in 2008, where I produced the bicentennial concert celebrating the 200 years of Casa Ricordi here in Miami. So I'm very grateful to Archivio Ricordi and Pierluigi Ledda and to Bertelsmann and all the team that put together this wonderful special limited editions, and I hope you will enjoy as well as we all are enjoying it in the family. Thank you very much.
I think more than Medea, we might even talk about the recuperation of this, the recuperation of this important repertory in the mid-20th century. Cherubini was an extremely influential composer when he was alive, but he was very conservative. He remained a classicist. However, it's interesting, this is the 250th anniversary, of course, of the birth of Beethoven that everyone is celebrating. In their own lifetime, Beethoven often said that he thought the greatest living composer was Cherubini. And interestingly enough, the Cherubini rescue operas were a model for his Fidelio. And also interesting, at Beethoven's funeral, they played Cherubini's Requiem. So he was very, very highly respected, but his opera repertory had fallen pretty much out of the common memory. In the mid 20th century, an extremely important relaunch of Medea, this rediscovery by the conductor Vittorio Gui in 1953 at the Maggio Musicale Fiorentino, with the upcoming star who had already begun to make a name for herself, Maria Callas. She was already well known to Italians for performances she had performed in the late 1940s in Italy. And this 1953, let's say, restoration, as it were, of this long forgotten work was absolutely a stunning cultural moment. La Scala immediately thereafter, La Scala of Milan, wanted to program it as well. And that was also the Italian launch of Leonard Bernstein, who stepped in for the original conductor was Vittorio De Sabata. He was not well. Bernstein stepped in, and that was an also wonderful moment. So that was one of the reasons why, let's say, Cherubini's Medea was on everyone's mind. When Casa Ricordi wanted to celebrate its 150th anniversary in 1958, it was looking for really exciting projects it could do to consolidate the corporate's name. They had always been, of course, a traditional music printing publisher and preparing parts as well for performance. They were certainly the most famous publisher in the world of opera music, and they were known throughout the world for that above all. It wasn't in their mind at that time to do records. If you go back 50 years, Casa Ricordi had toyed with the idea of doing records in the very early part of the century, but there was a lot of debate among the administrators and said, no, this isn't what we do. And so they would license rights, of course, to have so much of their famous repertoire, Verdi, Puccini, etc., to be recorded, but they did not themselves want to become record producers. So this happenstance, this confluence of opportunities, this will to launch a record label was a bit of an uphill battle within the publisher itself, the administration. But in the end, the idea of choosing this wonderful occasion. So you have Cherubini's Medea recently, let's say, not really rediscovered, but let's say relaunched with the marvelous participation of Maria Callas, of course. Tullio Serafin, the conductor, important to talk about him. The appassionati know very well who he is. He was never a prima donna style conductor. He's what we would call a superb journeyman conductor. And he was one of the finest conductors ever to work with voices. Maria Callas herself said that she learned so much from Tullio Serafin. He had taken over at La Scala after Toscanini left to go to the Metropolitan, before and after World War I, came back again after World War II, and in between that, he was the conductor at the Metropolitan. So all these things coming together, these wonderful stars, this great occasion with the orchestra of La Scala, an excellent, excellent conductor, and of course, this already rising star, was just a wonderful occasion to launch the idea that Casa Ricordi would finally get into the business of producing records.
So my scientific background is sociology. Specifically, I'm a cultural sociologist, interested in music sociology, urban sociology, but also the meaning of the medium for the creation and preservation of different art forms, specifically music. So that's, let's say, the broadly conceived cultural scientific background with which I come to the discussion. I am no expert in opera, and I was very happy to learn from Gabriele about certain fascinating facts, historical facts related to the creation of this record, and people who were involved in it. And from the point of view of a cultural sociologist, I think what is happening here is that we have, as Gabriele said, a very interesting confluence of iconic figures. So iconicity, or cultural icon is one of the central categories of description in anthropology and sociology, cultural sociology today. And having heard this description of what was going on before and during the production of that record, I was immediately reminded of applicability and relevance of this concept of iconicity to what was actually happening in 1958 on the date of the production of the record, and in the preceding years, in the whole context that actually made it possible. So in order to respond to the question, what is a most interesting aspect for me from the point of view of a cultural sociologist with the interest that I have, is exactly this confluence. So we have an iconic venue, La Scala, which of course is very important for the cultural framing of this event and creation of a sense of a special moment, right? Just about time. When we're talking about such recordings, is also about the space and venue when it happens. Cultural sociologists talk quite a lot about aura of objects and places. Famously, Walter Benjamin, for example, talked about the aura of the work of art. But we can also extend that claim and say that there's something like an aura of a particular place or a venue, right? Metropolitan Opera in New York City, or La Scala in Milan. So I think that that's one aspect of iconicity. We talk about the iconic venue here, but we also have those incredible individuals, artists, iconic artists coming together in this place at this particular time, giving new life to this half forgotten work that at the creation was kind of a of the musical movement, right? But then Cherubini kind of fell out of fashion, and it took many years to rediscover his work and reappreciate him, which, by the way, is a very common story in cultural history and the history of art and music more generally, right? We know about people who were famous during their lifetimes, then kind of fell out of fashion and needed to be rediscovered and experience a kind of a renaissance here. So I think that that's quite fascinating. This is, for me, one of the most interesting aspects, that we have these iconic individuals, Maria Callas, giving new life, a kind of a renaissance moment for this particular musical work, which again was once highly appreciated. Beethoven himself considered Cherubini one of the greatest composers of that time, but people very often are not aware of that, and I think that this is the relevance also that I will speak about later, the relevance of this particular recording, bringing new life to an old masterful work.
Well, it's a very complicated questions because well, I will draw some points out of those who preceded me, and they have said the most important things, the main important things that regards the Medea rediscovering. When we talk about iconicity, well, it's really impressive that I am in a hotel room that I didn't choose myself for this recording and for this meeting with all of you, and I found behind myself this fantastic photo of the final output of the long journey and the long connection between Maria Callas and Medea. A connection that starts in 1953, that goes on till 1962, when there are the last two performances in La Scala for the last production, which was in 1961, and where all the last performances of Maria Callas in La Scala at all. But allowed Maria Callas to present this important role for her in different opera houses, Florence and Rome, in London, of course, and to give us the possibility to judge also her incredible qualities as an interpreter, and also the condition of her voice, which changed very much from 1953 to 61, when the performances, the last performance is recorded. And there are many other roles that Maria Callas was very much important in discovering. Of course, as she left her mark on Norma, she left her mark talking about roles and title roles of opera that were not forgotten but very rarely presented, or that changed completely their character after Maria Callas interpreted them. So Norma and Anna Bolena, as well as Il Pirata. And for some reasons, if we think of the idea of Ricordi to record as a first issue a Medea, so a forgotten opera with Maria Callas, they picked up the perfect singer, the very good cast, and the perfect idea of the renaissance of a title, which, for instance, did not happen for the other opera record companies that were that testified nowadays the immense legacy of Maria Callas, because under Vartelegge in EMI she recorded exactly in the same year just a few months before recording Medea, Turandot and Manon Lescaut, and particularly Manon Lescaut, nothing out of her repertoire. She sang it beautifully, and she left an important recording, but she didn't. They didn't allow her to record Macbeth, nor that's for a series of problems with other disc existing. Nor Armida, nor Vespri Siciliani, or all the roles that would have really enlightened our knowledge if they were on disc. Luckily enough, we have live performances, but a disc is quite different. Why I was saying Medea is so important, because of course what we hear today in that recording and in all the other recordings that we have, which are live recording, is the Medea that has been rediscovered and that brings back all the changes that have gone through the 19th century. So Medea that has been transformed from the opera comique version in the Lachner version with the musical recitativo written by Lachner, which were very much loved by Guy, very well accepted by Bernstein. He couldn't do much else, of course, he was jumping in. Very much loved by Callas, which testified this in the Juilliard School lectures when she was she had already finished her career, and where she concentrates part of her incredible dramatic and musical strength. So music which is not also by Cherubini. The main difference of Medea with other titles is this. The life of Medea has been, as we know it in this recording, so not the opera comique that has been rediscovered today by Anna Caterina Antonacci, by Sonia Yonceva, that was also sung by Shirley Verret. I mean, French version with spoken parts, the recitatives in the spoken parts, as it was originally conceived. Well, that Medea exists only because of the presence of Maria Callas. It's not that important that we have a good supporting cast, even if in this case we have at least one very special feature, which is Renata Scotto. But it's really important because it gives us the connection, which is really unique, of a Greek tragic role, true neoclassical role, and with a Greek singer, a singer which is at the same time Italian, American, Greek and French, but had this very strong Greek roots. And she mentioned it many, many times, even when she was doing Iphigenia to Visconti, when she saw a neoclassical set, even a Tiepolesque set. She asked why. She wanted to sing, and that was her idea, maybe a little bit naive, but it made really sense. A Greek tragic heroine. And that's the same thing happens with Medea, and that is why it's so important in the record history, in the operatic history. The presence of Medea, of Maria Callas, really gave new life to this Medea. This version of Medea does not stand alone without a very great singer. Some other great singer came afterwards, but no one could revive it as Callas did, and it never really entered the repertoire after Callas' disappearance from the scenes.
Well, I mean, we have to bear in mind that today things are structured very differently, all the way from the very bottom, where people can record music excellently with equipment that is available at home, all the way up to the fact that every major opera theater or performing organization is already structured to do highly professional recordings. In these days, if you go back to the mid-20th century, obviously these were vastly complicated enterprises. They were collaborative work that needed to tap a large number of technical skills. In fact, the recording itself was handled by Mercury Records, they were American technicians who were brought in because at that time the the best recording technicians had been developed, let's say, in Germany, the United States, and the UK, largely because those were the areas where the recording industry had first been commercially successful. Even in the beginning of the 20th century, there were a number of very important recordings that were made in Milan. Most famously, maybe the recordings that Enrico Caruso had done on cylinders in the lobby of the hotel just up the street from La Scala, where the hotel where Verdi had died. But these were done by British companies or American companies. So American technicians were brought in who already had, let's say, developed a number of very, very important skills. Uh, Placement of microphones, working with large spaces, knowing exactly where everything would best record. And in fact, Nanni Ricordi, in an interview that he gave 25 years ago, um, had mentioned the fact that everyone was astonished that there were very few retakes because of the high level of expertise. Now, one thing that's also quite interesting about this recording, Dr. Penna had mentioned earlier the several other recordings of Medea in Dallas and elsewhere. They're all live recordings, and audiophiles love them very much because, of course, they have the excitement and drive that comes from live recordings. But this being a studio recording with such a measured and careful conductor like Tullio Serafin, I'm calling it a studio recording, but not in the sense that it was done in a studio. It was just, let's say, everyone placed perfectly well within the context of an orchestral hall. This is probably the most balanced recording of Medea you can hear. All the voices are crisp, clear. The post-production is amazing, even from a point of view of us looking 60 years later, 62 years later. And I think even the most critical audiophile will be really excited with how this was done. And so bringing all this together meant not only convincing Nanni Ricordi was a very young man. He had an accomplished pianist. He had a diploma in piano at the Conservatory Milano. He was also, he'd gotten a degree in law, but didn't want to do that. He had been sent to New York in 1955 to sort of learn the business and work with Franco Colombo, who was the representative for Ricordi in New York. And he came back very excited about the potentials of, of a traditional music publisher starting in a field like recording. And so, as much as anything else, I think when they gave this very young man the task of saying, okay, Dischi Ricordi was founded the day before Christmas in 1957. It was all done so very, very quickly. And then this recording was done right after that, and it was issued some tracks later. I think what he showed was enormous, not only technical knowledge, but organizational skills. The Americans like to use this term of herding cats when you try to bring together very, very difficult things. And at the same time, all the singers were traveling. Even the conductor missed the first rehearsal because he had to go to New York. The idea of pulling all of this very complicated stuff together in an analog age, today in a digital age, here we all are working, talking from various parts of the world. Imagine doing all this in 1958. It's quite an astonishing achievement, really.
Yeah, so I think there's many different aspects to this issue, and I would like to briefly try to point out just a few of them in the limited time that we have today. I think it also nicely dovetails what Gabriele told us about the production of the record. I think one very important aspect of the vinyl revival that we have observed in the last decade, but also in this particular case, that emphasizes the importance and significance of this reissue, is that when you listen to the record, to the vinyl record today, you get the sense of being in direct touch with the heritage. This particular performance was recorded live in 1958. at that time we didn't have digital technology, we didn't have any other technology, right? That analog technology was the technology. You had to deal with that. And as Gabriele said, it was actually a logistical challenge, technically speaking, but also in terms of coordination, bringing all the people together, making sure that this particular unique live performance is recorded perfectly. And of course, by 58, the analog technology was pretty much complete. We already had stereo recording possible. Just 1 year later, an iconic Kind of Blue record by Miles Davis was recorded. By the way, most of those were first takes, improvised pieces. And so when you hear it right now, it's really quite amazing, like how technically perfect it is. When you listen to the original record from 59, you hear, just like in this case, it's really an amazing sound recording. And also these are all first takes, so the mastery of the musicians involved is also gets emphasized in this way, right? So in other words, we already had by 58, 59, the technology was there, but of course you didn't have all the facilities that we have right now. And the performance was then released on vinyl. There were no cassettes, and there was no streaming, nothing of that sort, right? That was the king format, the only format. That was the beginning of the so-called golden era of the analog record. So today, of course, we have the possibility of listening to different versions of such performances, right? Like they exist in digital form. But what is important for collectors, what is important for lovers of particular genres or particular artists, is that if you can have that kind of performance on the analog record, that is in a way that it was original released, right? And the whole recording at that time was calibrated for releasing the record. Then many people, many collectors, many music lovers say that's the authentic, that's the real way of listening to this, and this is the proper way, right? Of course, it can be convenient to listen to the digital version, let's say, but it's something different when you have it on vinyl, because this connects you to this original context of recording and production and release of that. So that's one important aspect of or significance of such reissues. They reestablish a certain cultural and we could say a technical continuity with the original context, right? So if you to account the iconicity of the place, iconicity and mastery of the people involved, it's like paying a special respect to the original condition of the recording, to the artists involved, and so on and so forth. Another aspect is, and this is what people who are involved in the renaissance of vinyl record today, not only in this particular music genre but more generally, is that listening to records has the affordance of creating a sense of ritualistic encounter with music. So portable digital devices are convenient, but they are not necessarily geared towards creating a sense of a ritualistic engagement with music. And when we talk about such iconic performances that demand special attention, that demand focus, they are supposed to be listened to and consumed in a particular way. And because vinyl as a medium is amenable to this kind of a ritualistic focused use in the time when we are so distracted, this creates a very special condition for the appreciation of music. So I think that this is something that we should always keep in mind. Another third aspect is that once we have the record produced with the artwork, of a particular size, which is actually a tangible object, we can start appreciating the recording as something that in German we call Gesamtkunstwerk, right? That's the total work of art. It's not only the performance that is being recorded and we can hear, but it's also an object, a physical object that has certain properties that people also appreciate. And of course, there's this artwork, which is also important in this particular case. We can see the performer, we can see the picture of the performer in a particular format. And of course, last but least, very often also in jazz music, for example, liner notes are very important, right? Like reissues often take care of providing a historical context, additional information. It's not just data, as people say often who are engaged in this kind of discourse. Music is more than data. Music is not just data. It's the history, it's the context, it's the information about the whole thing. And this is what records also provide. And this is also what reissues often can do best. Sometimes original recordings don't necessarily include all the information. The reissues that celebrate such iconic recordings are often instrumental in bringing new level of knowledge and new kinds of appreciation to these recordings. And I think that this is maybe the moment when I can connect that with what I said before, and namely the importance of iconicity and giving new life to the previously very well-known famous records that for some time were forgotten and then experienced some sort of revival or renaissance. I think this is important today because we live in a period of oversaturation, right? There's just so much information, or even we could say informational noise. There's so much music being produced that reissues, especially of such iconic recording, and especially when so many iconic elements are bring together in one work of art, they perform a very special role of a kind of a cultural spotlight. It's like bringing certain recordings back into our attention, right? There's so much competition for attention. There's so much amazing stuff, but also so much informational noise. And one way of defining icons in cultural sociology is that they are tips of informational or cultural icebergs, right? And it's a kind of a lighthouse, really. But again, there's quite a few of these iconic entities, and they also compete with each other. So each time a reissue comes, there's this moment of being in spotlight again, and bringing certain forgotten or half forgotten things again to the central spotlight, and giving them a new life. And I think that for this reason, it's very important. If we did not live in the time of oversaturation, which has been facilitated by digital revolution, then perhaps that particular function wouldn't be so important. But we do live in a time when we are oversaturated, distracted, and these reissues, in this sense, in the condition of contemporary music industry, can play a very important role. So these are the factors that I would like to emphasize here.
Well, we should first say that all the records of Maria Callas are relevant in her career. All the legacy she left appears year by year more important even. Probably at that time it was more controversial than today. Today there's much more unanimous appreciation and even somehow worshipping of Maria Callas. But this was not exactly the case when the recording was made. Of course, Maria Callas was the most important singer in the world in 1957. What is interesting, I think, in this recording, first of all, is the only one studio, as was pointed out already. The only studio recording among many other live performances. Florence and Milan one, Guy and Bernstein, and the following ones in Dallas, in London, and in Milan, with shippers. Well, so if we think about the dates, 57 sets in the middle of this journey. The journey starts with a very strong theatrical figure, a very inflamed, almighty voice in 53, which could tackle anything from Constanze in Führer auf dem Serail and Die Walküre. Let's remember that it was Tullio Serafin that in 1949 in Venice convinced Maria Callas, or saw in the voice of Maria Callas the possibility of singing in I Puritani just right after Die Walküre, something that actually she could do, and she also was convinced she could do, and the two matched very well, and that is why she respected him so much, and she always said she learned so much from him, and that is why it is important to have Tullio Serafin in this recording. So that's another important thing, is that the two are coupled together in this recording. Not only from 53 to 57, Maria Callas has changed completely. She had become world famous, incredibly rich, slim, elegant, glamorous. She was already blooming also in the socialite world, in the what was called Jet Society or Face Society. She was beginning to leap in another part of her life that was also very brilliant and glamorous. Was not included singing, was excluding year by year singing from 58 on, from the accident of Norma in Rome to the tendency to skip operatic performance in favor of very well paid and wonderfully sung and also very glamorous concerts. And then, of course, the connection and the love story with Onassis, the divorce from Meneghini, and I wouldn't say sudden, but a very rapid vocal decline end of her career. We should then open a very large panel discussing the vocal decline of Maria Callas, because 65 performances of Norma and Tosca shows us a singer that we would love to hear in the opera, on the opera stage today. But nonetheless, in 57 she was still more or less in full command of her voice. There are some sign of strain, but still the voice is the same voice that we had met in the fantastic 54, 56 seasons, above all in Milan, and it's also recorded in several other interpretations of, I don't know, Trovatore, also Madame Butterfly, and in discs. But here she gives a performance of only vocal performance with a very careful balancing in front of the microphone. It was not very easy, or always very easy to mic the voice of Maria Callas, which was very big. But now here she plays with a subtlety, an elegance. So she's so nuanced, more nuanced maybe than the inflamed performances of 53, and in better vocal form than the following performances, which are some of them also very important, because, for instance, London has less cuts that we have in this recording. That is a little shortcoming. It's interesting that the cast altogether sports all singers that Maria Callas had met already in other performances of Medea, Modesti, Picchi, she already sang with him, and of course Pirazzini, and Tullio Serafin. The only newcomer was Renata Scotto, which has an interesting relation also. She had also some sort of feud in the following years with Callas, or at least distance feuds, or press manufactured feuds. But nonetheless, in 1953, when Callas arrived in La Scala with Medea, it was only a few days after the opening, which was La Vallee with Renato Tebaldi and Scotto singing Walter in La Scala, very young singers. Very young singer at that time, and Scotto had just, when she recorded Medea in 53, had just jumped in for Maria Callas, who had dropped one performance of Sonnambula in Edinburgh. It was the end of her total commitment with opera. She was happy to drop this performance, which was not put on a contract actually, to go to an Elsa Maxwell party. And it's interesting that maybe Scotto could have tackled with vocal possibilities, which were frailer than Callas, but she learned the lesson very well. She could have tackled Medea, she never did, but she recorded an aria in a rare concert. She didn't record, she sang an aria, which is recorded live with Lorraine Mazel in 1979. And when we hear that live recording, you can look through it, you will find the complete absorption of the lesson of Maria Callas that shines also in this recording. And I think to have this recording in the vinyl version with its sound, with the possibility of today stereophonic system, is a way to bring us back to the essence of that voice, to the essence of the musical gift Maria Callas had, gift that was conquered with such an incredible discipline and work and talent, that we can consider this as the center of a trip that starts in 53 and ends here just behind my back with this Medea, which was silent, because Maria Callas was used by Pasolini in 69 as an icon, as a face with eyes, with a nose, with a Greek tonic strength, but not even her voice is heard because she was dubbed in the Italian version, which is the most famous one. So from a very full voice Medea in 53 to a silent Medea in 69, in between there's this beautiful Ricordi recording.
E che io son Medea.
It's a very good question, and I would pick up two of the fascinating points that both Andrea and Dominik have made. Two terms that have impressed me in this conversation: iconic and iconicity, and ritual and ritualistic approach. On the one hand, as we know, Maria Callas was so enormously famous that for 50 years after she stopped singing, every soprano was simply referenced. She was the benchmark. For good or for worse, everything was referenced to Callas. It's a little bit like Toscanini. The long history of Toscanini, long after he's gone, every subsequent conductor, every contemporary conductor was compared. And she transcends this, even as her voice itself changes over time, as Andrea pointed out. And as we can hear through these various recordings, she became a symbol of il mondo mondano. I mean, she was in every social newspaper, even people who might never have stepped into an opera hall or recital concert. Maria Callas represented a certain representation, even because of the roles that she chose. I mean, Medea is such a powerful woman, the roles in Norma, and what Pasolini saw in her, not simply the obvious, the physiognomy of the ultimate Greek woman, but what that power meant. And I find this really fascinating. I think if we had had a different cast in this record, it might not have the kind of impact so many years on as it does today, because the person herself is a symbol of so many things of mid 20th century aspiration. What comes immediately to mind is someone like Jacqueline Kennedy, And then from the ritual aspect, as the professor said earlier, it's so interesting because, early recordings were sold as something about the idea that the sound quality is such that you take the theater home with you. And there was this whole ritual of it. The idea was, unlike with digital, and we carry it around with them and we listen to it on earphones or in the car or while we're jogging, etc. But there was this entire ritual around listening to an LP. And you have this very complicated stereo setup, and you have these magnificent speakers that you placed very carefully in parts of your home. And then it's as though you went to the theater, but you sit in your most comfortable chair in the most optimum spot. But it's as though you were in the theater. The only difference is you're in your pajamas, but you're listening to this performance with the same kind of mental and cultural approach, ritual again, as you would if you were going to the theater. You just don't have someone next to you blowing their nose. It's, and I think that's so important. I think that's part of why young people are rediscovering vinyl today, and even us old people. But I mean, there's a whole cultural apparatus around it that goes far beyond the infinite discussions about is the sound different on analog as it is from digital, or are you hearing it in a different way? There's vast layers of ritual approach. So these two things that come together, the rediscovery of vinyl, and it's such a phenomenon, and it's just so magnificent, and with it the rediscovery of different kinds of listening apparatus, and the iconic status of this singer who became a star at many other levels, just a social, cultural history. I think all of those things coming together makes this particular recording. It wasn't done purposefully in 1958, but it has become a touchstone, I think, for all those many reasons.
Yeah, to say Gabriele encapsulated so perfectly what I would also consider as the central issue here, that I can only agree with that, and maybe expand a little bit on our understanding of ritual and iconicity that I do believe is center of the more general phenomenon of the vinyl revival, but also in the specific case of reissues like that. Um, Maybe I can start with a little sociological observation that has been made recently during the Corona lockdown, namely. We have observed that the streaming services went down, and on the surface, that may sound a little bit counterintuitive. You might think, well, people have maybe more time, people are maybe less busy, people are maybe less focused. They should listen to more music, not to less music. But actually, the explanation of why it happened was that people were commuting less because they were stuck at home, and because they mostly listened to music while commuting because they used portable devices. That's why we observed the numbers of streaming went down, right? So there's this beautiful, a quick explanation. Of course, it's more complex than that, but I think it showed something. It made us aware of something very important, namely, what are the trends today in terms of music consumption or music listening practices? What are some of the main consequences of the digital revolution and an ongoing virtualization and digitalization of music consumption? And I think against this background, the ritual affordances of vinyl as the music medium become particularly pronounced, particularly important, and the moment when we get connected, we get the sense of being directly connected to the heritage in a case like this one, right? That we have a reissue of an iconic record. I think that that's precisely the moment when we can appreciate the importance of the medium for and this particular medium in this case for understanding of music and appreciation of music. There's this kind of a typical saying among music aficionados who like to say that music speaks for itself, or it should speak for itself. But from the sociological point of view, music rarely speaks for itself, even though sociologists also admit that there's of course something very powerful to music as an artistic form. There's something really viscerally moving, really emotionally powerful that touches us somehow directly. But we shouldn't forget that in order to decode a given performance, to fully understand its cultural cultural meaning and more general significance, aesthetic significance, but also social cultural significance, we have to be aware of what Gabriele called a cultural apparatus. There's this entire cultural apparatus connected to the context of production as well as the context of reception. And technology obviously was very important for the production of this particular record. And right now, when we have this reissue, we of course the question of the context of reception and the context of appreciation and listening to that. And here, of course, we immediately encounter these vast layers of ritualization. We encounter the questions of sound quality, which may not be the most, or to put it differently, it's not necessarily the case that the analog record sounds better, but it sounds different, and in certain situations this can matter. And again, I can return to what I said before, namely that if we have the record that was recorded in an analog way and crafted for the purpose of being released as a record with the technical limitations and specifications of this particular medium in mind, all these producers were highly aware of what the medium is, as what are the limitations and affordances of the medium. Then once you are aware of that, then you realize that the vinyl reissue represents an establishing of certain connectedness to the original context, and in this sense also paying respect to this record. So I would say that that's very important. And of course, we already touched upon this issue. Playing records at home. Here we have the whole universe of this being a domestic pleasure, right? And when we are in a setting which is familiar, which is comfortable, where the appreciation of music can gain also this special meaning, we also can share it with some of our friends or loved ones in this domestic setting. So I think this gets connected to the meanings of home, like what are the cultural meanings of home. So there's a fusion of these kind of collective iconic meanings and very personal intimate meanings, right? So all of a sudden these super famous people come home, so to speak. They visit us in our intimate private spaces, and many people emphasize that aspect as well, right? Some of them maybe couldn't afford going to, or it would be logistically too complicated to go to performances. But it's different with the records. Of course, there's other questions involved here, whether someone has actually means to purchase an amazing sound system that would actually enable people to hear the music as it's supposed to sound. We shouldn't be oblivious of that fact. But in principle, the reissue of this kind creates an opportunity for people to have a sense of direct connectedness with heritage and to experience music in a ritualistic manner. So again, I can only re-emphasize this aspect as very important, that it's not just about the iconicity of these amazing performers, but also the way in which we encounter that kind of music and become aware that there's so much heritage to be rediscovered, that there's so much rich history in the past, and that the medium really makes a difference, in the sense that medium is the message. So this reissue, being an analog reissue on vinyl with all the information and cultural apparatus encoded in it, is indeed something that is very, very important. And this is what makes this kind of project, I would say, highly relevant today, regardless of whether someone is particularly interested in a specific genre or a particular performer. It's a rediscovery of the value of the heritage, of the value of the medium, especially in the context of digitality and commercialization that we observe today.
Well, we can pick different point of views. First of all, from the historical point of view, if we rediscover today the same disc, the same support, the somehow the same box with part of the same information, the same image, we will take a look and we will bring to our homes the same recording that Maria Callas used to listen to. From the beginning of the 60s on, above all from when she decided to live in Paris, and moreover, more and more when she broke with Onassis and then she was on her own, she used to listen more and more to her recordings in a maybe also very melancholic way. And this is one of the recordings she could listen to from the very beginning, because it was a recording of Medea from Ricordi, as the other ones were recorded by Amy. Most of the live recordings surfaced, of course, later. Some of them have surfaces from other sources, even recently, with other qualities of recording, because some of them are really very bad at the beginning. that's the first point. Second point is that this recording, when appeared in 1958, was the recording of Medea, was the rediscovery of Medea, the rediscovery of a piece that everybody has been talking about in the musical world, that was admired not only from Beethoven, was admired by Schumann, was admired by Brahms, was heard by some of the audience in 1909 with Esther Mazzoleni singing, but nothing else was left. There was only a score that had also to be reprinted by Ricordi, and at the beginning didn't bring even the differences between Lachner work and Cherubini, so it was even thought to be only the work of Cherubini. Then of course that's the Testi new score with all the differences and all the details, where the recitativo are and where the added recitativo are. But in any case, all the scholars, all the people could either play the score at the piano in a private performance, or read it, or dream about it, or all of a sudden go to the theater, see Maria Callas, and finally listen to Maria Callas in a recording, and this was the recording. So we have a piece of history that has also changed somehow the cultural world when we talk about Cherubini and Cherubini importance in Cherubini rediscovery, which nowadays is much more advanced. We are listening to recording of Lodoiska and other pieces, and also instrumental music and sacred music, which are also recorded again. But at that time was really a sort of bloom out of. There was a critic that said a seed taken out of a pyramid, Egyptian pyramid, that was blooming again. And to end with the last element that regards the presence of Medea in the cultural world, not only the musical and operatic world. We have to remember that in 55, when Medea was presented in Rome, that apparently were some of the most applauded and the warmest received performances of Callas in Medea, also because she was feeling totally free in a theater where she was very much loved, but she didn't have maybe the how can we say, the responsibility she kept on herself when she was singing La Scala, and when she arrived with Medea, and of course in La Scala at the end of her journey, she was a little bit more frail and fatigued. However, in Rome, something happened which was really unusual for the operatic world. There were weeks of discussion in the newspaper between Pannine, which was an important musical critic, and then Mario Prats, which was an Anglicist, which was a scholar, and then again a Latinist, Paratore, and then again other critics, like he used to happen in the 19th century with and even before with Goethe or Foscolo or Stendhal, Dumas, or even up to Proust, discussing about interpreters and music. That was not happening anymore. Maybe they were discussing composers from time to time, or directors, but not for sure singers. And this happened again because of Medea and because of Maria Callas. She created many other controversies, but this is the probably the highlight from the cultural point of view, and somehow is testified by this record.
I would just make one little note. For those of you who are fortunate enough to buy a copy of this, I know it's a limited edition. It contains a brief but fascinating overview of the history of how this recording came about, signed by Maria Pia Ferraris and Pierluigi Ledda. It's a fascinating read. I hope they'll post it online too for those who don't have the opportunity to buy the record. So that's a captivating reading as well.
Io